Welcome back to Random History, the podcast where we dig up the bizarre, the forgotten, and the downright weird stuff from the dusty archives of the past. I'm the navigator as we explore the little-known events and people that make history such an amazing subject. These are not the topics you would have heard about in school. In fact, if you did hear about them, you're likely to think that they could not possibly be real. But they are. Several years ago, there was a Nicolas Cage movie out about a group of men who had a dramatic impact on the course of the Pacific Theater during the Second World War. Unfortunately, Windtalkers focused more on Nicolas Cage's character instead of the actual heroes, the Navajo Code Talkers, who deserve to be the central point of the film. Today, I will discuss some of these heroes in the Pacific Theater, the real Code Talkers. When you think of World War II, images of tanks rolling across Europe, or planes dogfighting over the Pacific, or the massive bombing raids on German cities and factories, those might come to mind. But tucked into the massive conflict is a quieter, less flashy story, one of ingenuity, resilience, and a language that totally stumped the enemy. The Navajo Code Talkers, a group of Native American Marines, turned their native tongue into an unbreakable code that helped the Allies win the war. Their story isn't just about military strategy. It's about a people who'd been pushed to the margins, finding a way to save lives and prove their worth on a global stage. The roots of the Code Talkers stretch back to a time before the war, when the Navajo, or Diné, as they call themselves, were fighting battles of their own. Living on a sprawling reservation across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, they'd faced decades of U.S. government efforts to erase their culture. Boarding schools forced Navajo kids to speak English, punishing them for using their own language. By the mid-1940s, many Navajo families were just barely scraping by, caught between tradition and a world that didn't seem to want them. Yet, it was this very language, suppressed for so long, that would become our secret weapon. The idea started with a guy named Philip Johnston. He wasn't Navajo himself, but he'd grown up on the reservation as the son of missionaries. Johnston knew the Navajo language was complex, full of tricky sounds and grammar that baffled outsiders. He'd also heard about how Choctaw soldiers used their language to confuse the Germans in World War I. When Pearl Harbor hit in 1941 and the U.S. plunged into the war, Johnston pitched his plan to the Marines. Recruit native Navajo speakers to create a code the Axis powers just could not crack. At first, the Marine Corps brass were skeptical. Could a language with no written military terms really work? They decided to give it a shot. In early 1942, the first group of 29 Navajo men showed up at Camp Elliott in California. They weren't your typical recruits. Most were young, some barely out of their teens. They were raised herding sheep or farming in remote corners of the reservation. Guys like Chester Nez, one of the original 29, had grown up speaking Navajo at home, but learned English in those harsh boarding schools. They weren't just bilingual. They were tough, shaped by a life that demanded grit. The Marines put them through boot camp, then handed them a wild task: invent a code from scratch using their Navajo language. Here's where it gets interesting. Navajo isn't just hard to learn. It's unwritten, passed down orally, and packed with sounds that don't exist in English or Japanese. The Code Talkers built a system that was part dictionary, part creativity. They assigned Navajo words to military terms: Beshilani, or iron fish for a submarine; Jesho, a buzzard for a bomber. For letters, they picked Navajo words starting with the right sound, like Sinil, or axe, for A. To keep it fast, they memorized everything. No code books to lose or steal. In tests, they transmitted messages in minutes, while standard encryption machines might take hours. Needless to say, the Marine Corps was sold. By mid-1942, the Code Talkers hit the Pacific Theater, starting with the attack on Guadalcanal. Picture this: a Marine radio operator hunched over in a muddy foxhole, bombs screaming overhead, relaying orders through the static. Next to him, A Navajo Marine, maybe 20 years old, grabs the mic, spits out a stream of guttural syllables that sound like gibberish to everyone except for his buddy on the other end. The Japanese, who had cracked every U.S. code up to that point, were stumped. They had linguists, captured radios, and later on, even Navajo POWs. But they never broke that code. The code wasn't just secure, it was fast, letting U.S. forces pivot in real time while the enemy floundered. A great example of this is Iwo Jima, one of the war's bloodiest battles. In February 1945, the Code Talkers were everywhere. 6 of them worked non-stop during the first 2 days, sending over 800 messages without a single error. Major Howard Connor, a signal officer, later said, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." That's not hyperbole. In a battle where every second counts, their speed saved lives. They didn't just talk, they shouted coordinates, called in airstrikes, warned of ambushes, all while dodging bullets themselves. But it wasn't all glory. These guys faced the same racism Native Americans dealt with back home. Some white Marines didn't trust them at first, eyeing them as outsiders. And the work was brutal. Long hours, constant danger, and no breaks. Chester Nez remembered nights so cold his fingers stuck to the radio, yet he kept on going. They also carried a secret burden. The code's success depended on their silence. They couldn't brag or even tell their families what they'd done. After the war, they went home to the reservation, sworn to secrecy until the program was declassified 23 years later. So how successful were they? Well, the numbers speak for themselves. Over 400 Navajo men served as code talkers by the war's end, transmitting thousands of messages across campaigns like Tarawa, Saipan, Okinawa, and, as I said earlier, Iwo Jima. Not one message was ever deciphered by the enemy. Compare that to the German Enigma code cracked by the Allies with enough time and tech. The Navajo code held because it wasn't just a cipher. It was a living language, layered with cultural depth that no machine could possibly unravel. Military historians call it one of the most effective communication systems of the war. The real kicker, though, is what it meant for the Navajo. For a people told their ways were backward, this was redemption. They didn't just help win a war, they flipped the script, proving their language was a strength, not a liability. Unfortunately, recognition came very slowly. No ticker tape parades greeted them. Many slipped back into quiet lives, battling poverty and PTSD. It wasn't until 2001 that the original 29 Code Talkers got a Congressional Gold Medal, and by then, most of them had passed. Chester Nez, the last of them, died in 2014, but not before writing his story, a final act of breaking the silence. The Navajo Code Talkers were not perfect heroes out of a movie. They were regular guys, sons, brothers, shepherds, who stepped up when the world needed them. Their success wasn't luck, it was skill, guts, and a language that carried their history. They remind us that strength can come from unexpected places, and sometimes even the quietest voices shout the loudest when it really matters. I have traveled throughout Arizona, and to be honest, it's one of the most beautiful parts of our country. Back in the 1980s, my older brother was stationed in Phoenix for pilot training, and we would go and visit him. In the early 2000s, my wife, kids, and I would visit a ranch resort in Wickenburg, Arizona, where I'd play golf, rather badly, or we'd ride horses through the desert. We would take trips to Sedona or the Grand Canyon. The beauty of the state is really without rival. This was the home of the Code Talkers. It was the home of another hero, too. Today's true hero. Known as the Arizona Balloon Buster, he was a pilot during the First World War. Although killed in action, his exploits would earn him the Medal of Honor and get his name attached to an Air Force base in his hometown, Phoenix. Frank Luke Jr., an American fighter pilot during World War I, emerged as one of the most daring and accomplished aviators of his time. Born on 19 May 1897 in Phoenix, Arizona, to German immigrant parents, Luke was the 5th of 9 children. Growing up in the rugged Southwest, he developed a tough, independent spirit, excelling in sports like football and bare-knuckle boxing, and working briefly in the copper mines. His life took a dramatic turn when the U.S. entered World War I in April of 1917. Inspired by the call to serve, Luke enlisted in the aviation service of the U.S. Signal Corps on 25 September 1917 and trained as a pilot in Texas and California. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in March of 1918, he arrived in France that summer, joining the 27th Aero Squadron of the 1st Pursuit Group. Luke quickly gained a reputation as a fearless flyer, specializing in the dangerous task of destroying German observation balloons. These heavily defended Drachen provided critical intelligence to enemy forces, making them prime targets for our air forces. Nicknamed the Arizona Balloon Buster, Luke's extraordinary skill and bravery shone between 12 September and 29 September of 1918, when he downed 14 balloons and 4 enemy airplanes in just 10 sorties over 8 days, an unmatched feat in the war. His close friend, Lieutenant Joseph Werner, often provided cover during these missions, until Werner's death in combat on 18 September. That day, fueled by grief, Luke shot down 2 balloons and 3 planes in mere minutes, showcasing his relentless determination. Despite his success, Luke's brash personality and tendency to defy orders, like flying solo without authorization, earned him few friends among peers and superiors. His commanding officer, Captain Alfred Grant, once threatened him with arrest for going AWOL, only for Major Harold Hartney to intervene. Luke's final mission came on 29 September 1918 during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Ignoring orders, he took off from a forward base near Verdun to attack 3 balloons near Mervaux, France. After alerting a U.S. balloon company to watch, he downed all 3 targets, but was hit by anti-aircraft fire. Severely wounded, he crash-landed his Spad 8 near Marvaux, strafed German troops, killing 6 and wounding others. He then stumbled toward a creek. Surrounded by enemy soldiers demanding his surrender, Luke drew his pistol and fought until a fatal chest wound ended his life at the age of 21. Luke's body was initially buried by the Germans, but American forces located his grave in 1919. His extraordinary heroism earned him the posthumous Medal of Honor, presented to his father in Phoenix in May of 1919, making him the first U.S. airman to receive this honor. He also received 2 Distinguished Service Crosses and an Italian War Merit Cross. Luke Air Force Base in Arizona bears his name, a testament to his legacy as a top American ace, second only to Eddie Rickenbacker, who praised him as, quote, the most daring aviator and greatest fighter pilot of the entire war. Luke's brief but brilliant career reshaped aerial combat tactics and left an indelible mark on history. His Medal of Honor citation highlights his, quote, conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty, a fitting tribute to a man who lived and died with unparalleled courage. Lieutenant Luke's Medal of Honor is currently on display in the National Museum of the Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, one of my favorite places on Earth. His legacy also still lives on in Phoenix. Today, Luke Air Force Base is still a major feature to his native city's landscape. Currently, it's the home of 4 F-16 training squadrons and 3 F-35 training squadrons, both crucial to the air superiority mission of the United States Air Force. There's even a training squadron for the Singapore Air Force learning to fly the F-16. Anyway, this brings us to the end of another episode of Random History. I hope you enjoyed it and will come back and listen to future episodes. If you'd like to view the transcript or sources for this episode, click on the description. You can also make suggestions for future topics by clicking that same link or shooting us an email. As always, I want to thank Argos Media for producing Random History and to thank my wife for her continued support and inspiration. Until next time, make some history of your own. Navigator out.